Welcome to Modern Mind, Ancient Book, where we are going back to move forward. We're finding a love for the law, the prophets, and the writings. My name is Roger, although the guest today will probably inadvertently call me Bo, because that's how he knows me. The guest today is a gentleman by the name of David Goldstein. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Roger. I can't call you Bo, but I should probably call you Roger. So good to be on, Roger. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming. Dave, I am very appreciative that you're willing to take the time to do this. You were a wonderful part of the time that I spent at Congregation Shema Israel, and learning from you, playing music with you, knowing your family, and just, experiencing life for, 8 or 9 years with you guys.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, it was just a very wonderful thing. And so this podcast is kind of the capstone of the how to reads, or the survey part of the Old Testament. And the purpose of this is to kind of faith in how it plays out with various individuals. You're the first of a series of 3 interviews we're going to conduct. And yours particularly is interesting because your faith journey is from a Jewish perspective, correct?
That is correct.
So how did you come to believe in Jesus, or Yeshua HaMashiach, how it would be phrased, Jesus the Christ, or the Messiah in Hebrew?
Well, it's actually a bit of a story here, and Roger, certainly if I get a little bit too windy here, you can cut me off or ask another question. But basically, both of my parents are Jewish, grew up in Jewish homes. In fact, my father would go to Orthodox synagogue with his grandfather, and interestingly, as in the case of many Jews in the world today, once my parents reached college, they kind of fell away from their faith. And in fact, they not only fell away from Judaism, but they became very attracted to Zen Buddhism. Both of my parents had an opportunity to go to Japan in the early 1950s. My father got a position at a Japanese university, and there they discovered Buddhism. And so we kids, when we were born, we would go back and forth to Japan, depending on, the year. My dad would spend time teaching at Purdue, as did my mom, Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. And then they would go to Japan and stay there for a couple of years and teach. And so my young childhood, if I could just encapsulate it, would be a bit confusing, because I knew I was Jewish. And when I visited my relatives in Cleveland, Ohio, we would celebrate Passover, and I loved the Jewish holidays. And then when we were home, in West Lafayette, Indiana, where Purdue University is, and also in Japan, my parents really didn't really associate with Judaism. They really were more practicing Zen Buddhism. And in fact, we had a Zen master live with us for twice in my childhood for a year each time.
Wow.
And so that was kind of confusing. So my young childhood was really devoid of synagogue. I knew I was Jewish. I knew I loved the holidays, but the Buddhism aspect was rather confusing. And that's kind of the way things continued until I was 14 years old. And when I was 14, we were back in Japan. My father was again teaching at the university there. And during my 14th year, my mom passed away when I was in Japan. And my dad had a 2-year contract, so we had to finish out the contract. But when we returned from Japan, when I was 16 years old, my dad made this statement. He said, "We're going back to synagogue." And so from the time I was 16, when I was a junior in high school, we went back and we attended synagogue. It was a conservative synagogue in Lafayette, Indiana, called the Sons of Abraham Congregation. And I absolutely loved it. It was Judaism exactly as I had thought it would be. Friday night services, Saturday mornings, the holidays, meals after services, which we call onegs. It's a time to share and those kind of things. And I loved that. And then I went on to college and participated in synagogue there on occasion, trying to make the high holidays, which are the holidays in the fall, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and also celebrate Passover. And so that's kind of the way things went. And I don't know if you know this, Bo, but actually during my graduate school years, I was at Indiana University. I was actually engaged to be married to a Jewish girl.
Oh.
And that did not work out. God seemed to have another plan for me. And we ended up breaking up. And after that, I ended up meeting my wife, Jennifer. Actually, I met her 2 weeks before I was actually going back to Japan on my own to teach at a university. I had my master's degree, and I had a 2-year teaching contract at a Japanese university.
Wow, that is all so very new to me. You know, I've known you for, it's got to be almost 20 years now, and I didn't know most of that. So
it's a bit of some twists and turns there.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So you have this very multicultural background and a heavy emphasis on, you grew up with educators, and so that makes sense why it's always been such a joy to sit down and learn from you, because you're a very capable teacher. Obviously, having such a very well-taught background. I did not know your parents were educators. They were college professors, huh?
Yes, they're both college professors. My father had his doctorate. My mother had a master's degree, and they both taught at Purdue University. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And then, so that also kind of fills in the gaps a little bit for me. You ended up in business, correct? And you did something automotive. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I was at this 2-year teaching contract in Japan, and then after I came back to the U.S., by that time I was married. That's a little bit of compliment. So I met my wife 2 weeks before I left for Japan. We wrote, and then amazingly, her parents allowed her to come and visit me in Japan during the winter of the first year that I was there. And we had such a great time. We really didn't think too much about it. We were like, well, you want to get married? Yeah, let's get married. So I ended up coming home after my first year of teaching at the Japanese university. We got married, and then I took her back to Niigata for another year. Niigata, Japan. It's on the Sea of Japan side of Japan. But she was there for another year. Then we moved to Tokyo, and I worked at a company that produced annual reports and investment type literature for Japanese corporations in English. And we were there for a year and a half, and then we ended up coming back after that year and a half. So basically it was in 1985 I came back, and then in the summer of 1986 I started working at General Motors, and I worked for General Motors for 23 years.
That's right. Yep. A very good career and an amazingly multicultural background. In fact, not many people understand Japanese culture. I can only assume I know what I know from what I've learned, but I know you know a lot more. The Japanese are very different than Americans, are they not?
Yes, you're absolutely right, Bo. What we say in the U.S., we have what's known as more of an individualistic culture. That means I do what I want to do, when I want to do, and when I want to do it, and it's much more based on my own feelings and intuition, etc. Japan is what we call a group society or consensus society, where the needs of the group outweigh the needs of the individual. So in a Japanese group, you're kind of always looking around, trying to sense how other people are feeling, kind of what the group is wanting to do. It's not so much of doing and going ahead with my own needs and desires. Very different from us.
Interesting. I wonder, do you believe that God used that culture to better help you understand even your own culture? Because I hear overlap. I'm not sure if you would agree with me, but it seems like Jewish culture is also very well. Maybe not today. I would need your input on that. But the Bible is honor shame. It's very much group oriented. And so, do you think that during that time, God was teaching and leading you through your cultural experiences?
Well, I would say, because with my story, I really feel like God led me to a certain point where I became a believer many years later. And I think one of the things about Japan is that it's very important to kind of see where other people are going, what they're doing, how they're feeling. It's kind of like a sensitivity towards others. And I feel that through my years in Japan, I've actually lived there for a total of probably 15 years, and I've traveled there with business and everything else. I mean, I've traveled there over 135 times. So I would say that has helped me to have more of a sensitivity towards others and just different situations. But one thing I will say, after I became a believer, and this is very interesting, is that in Japan, even though Christianity was brought to Japan in the late 1400s, still, even today, after 600-700 years, there's only maybe half of 1% of Japanese that are believers.
That's right.
And so the Japanese church is very small. And in a way, it's like when you're a Jew and you become a believer, it's kind of similar to a Japanese when they become a believer, because a lot of times in Japan, you're ostracized from your family. You're no longer Shinto, you're no longer Buddhist. You've taken on this new way. It seems very strange, very foreign, and people are wondering what you're doing. And so you kind of get a little bit of pushback, and you're ostracized a bit. It is not as much now, but it used to be maybe 20, 30 years ago, much more, that when you were a Jew and you became a believer in Yeshua or Jesus, you were also ostracized from your community and maybe your family. My rabbi at my congregation, his parents did not speak to him for years and years. I think his dad did not speak to him for 16 years after he became a believer in Jesus.
A price to be paid. Jesus said, I did not come to bring peace, but to divide, father against son, in this case. Let's go back in time a little bit, because that was all super interesting. I think it all probably ties together pretty amazingly. So 14 years old and then 16 years old, your father says you're going back to synagogue.
Yep.
You became an observant Jewish man in a conservative movement. Was it kind of like the Chabad kind of conservative, or more of the relaxed kind of conservative?
I would say it's probably, Chabad is like more of a teaching. They're like an organization that really promotes Jewish customs and Jewish learning, Jewish holidays, etc. I think that while I was at the synagogue, of course, I love the holidays and doing all that. But for example, I did not keep kosher. So, I grew up eating pork, and, I did eat pork. Of course, not at the synagogue. Of course, you didn't have that. So I didn't really follow the dietary laws. Now, the girl that I dated for 3 years, she was an Orthodox, conservative girl. She did keep kosher at home, and she did also follow the dietary restrictions. But that never was really a part of my life. I think due to the fact of my early years growing up in Japan and my parents not really following that route. So that was different. But if we just go ahead then. So let's say, how did I become a believer in Jesus? Should I kind of continue with that? Yeah,
that's what I'm interested in, because you came from this mixed background of Buddhism and sort of Judaism, and then eventually right back to Judaism, and then you married a Gentile woman.
Yes.
And Jen is a very wonderful woman. I love her to death. Obviously, you do too. You got 2 beautiful children with her. So from this Orthodox synagogue to back to Japan. When did you find Yeshua? When was that?
Well, okay. So my conservative synagogue, I went on to college and then finished grad school. I was in Japan teaching. So after that first year, I came back. Jennifer visited me, and we decided to get married. I married her in 1983 in July, came back to Japan, and then we were there in Japan for another 2.5 years, 1 year at the university, 1.5 years in Tokyo. Then we came home and we started our life in the United States, and I started working for General Motors. So the first 10 years of our married life together kind of went like this when we were back in the U.S. I would, we got transferred to Saginaw, Michigan. So I was there, and I would be attending synagogue on occasion, and she would go to church. And then sometimes she would ask me to go to church, and I'd go to church. And then sometimes there was communion. And then when there was communion, it made me very nervous because, obviously I really didn't associate with that. That wasn't part of my background. Church was very foreign to me.
Did it dawn on you at that point that communion was first instituted at Passover, or was that just was there not enough signs there in the church for you to see that?
Not enough signs, Roger, and I did not have the grasp of the scriptures. I really had not read the Bible, I must say. I took the Bible as literature. I mean, I knew some things about the Bible, and then I did some study because in college, I had to fend off the holy rollers on my floor. Maybe I'll call them that. These were the very well-meaning Christian men who would knock on my door once every couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so, and they would very kindly want to share scripture with me because they knew that I was going to hell, and they told me that you're going to hell, so we're here to help you find Jesus. So the church and these Bible-thumping guys and the history of the church and the Jewish people, persecution of Jews has been going on since about 200 A.D., and then we were kicked out of a lot of countries in Europe. We went through, the Inquisitions and the pogroms, being forced into ghettos, and a lot of history does not endear the church to Jewish people. I know they're very well-meaning, but it's just very difficult, and that's one of the reasons I believe it's very difficult for a Jew to come to faith, because it just feels like the church overall, the man-made church. I'm not talking about the Bible itself, but the man-made church seems to be very, very anti-Semitic in ways. So I was going to church with her, and she was coming to synagogue with me. I was attending some high holidays and Passover and doing that. So that's the way things went on for about 10 years. And 10 years into our marriage, I was in Japan, and I called my wife Jennifer from Japan just to talk to her. I would often call her, once, twice, 3 times when I'm away on business. So I called her, and she was so excited. And she said, I have to tell you something. I was like, well, what? What do you want to tell me? She said, I just got this postcard. I'm so excited. It says the most Jewish thing that you can do is to become a believer in Yeshua, Jesus. And I did not react very calmly, Roger. I have to tell you, I said, listen, throw that postcard away. That's probably something from Jews for Jesus. I dealt with them in college. They're a cult, and I don't want anything to do with them. And she said, well, it's a little bit too late. It actually came from a rabbi here. By this time, we were living in the Detroit area, Detroit, Michigan. It came from this rabbi in the Detroit, Michigan area, and I've already invited him and his wife to dinner.
Rabbi Lauren?
Yes, Rabbi Lauren, exactly, from Congregation Shema Israel. So I said, no, you're not inviting him to dinner. You call them up right now and tell them that they are uninvited, because I tell you what, either I'm going to be at my house for dinner on that night and they're not going to be there, or they're going to be at my house and I'm not going to be there. So that's what's happening. But, you know what, Roger? Wives are so logical, and I'm a very logical person, so logic speaks to me. So I'm waiting to hear what she has to say, and she says, oh, I see. You have room in your heart for the Buddhist, for those who believe in Shinto. You have room in your heart for the Muslim, but you don't have room in your heart to have dinner with this rabbi who believes in Yeshua or Jesus. And And I had nothing to say because that was very logical. Why was I so upset with this person who I hadn't even met?
That was a stinger.
That was a stinger for sure. Well, the appointed evening came, and Rabbi Lauren was there with his wife Martha, and I was there, and we're having dinner, and I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for him to pull out his Bible, thump it on the table, tell me I'm going to hell, let's have dessert, and you go home, and that'll be that.
Can I interrupt you for just a second so I can give just a tiny backstory on Rabbi Lauren? So Rabbi Lauren married Martha Brickner, correct?
That's correct.
And her brother is he still the head of Jews for Jesus, the president?
He just moved into he's no longer the executive, but he's kind of like he's above that. He's kind of like the board and that. But yeah, he just recently turned over that the executive directorship of Jews for Jesus. Yes,
that's right. And Rabbi Lauren is very Middle Eastern looking. Actually, he looks very much like a Jewish man. And Martha is also a very Jewish woman. So here, a Jewish man who has had more experience, presumably, with Buddhism and academia and Japan and this very unique and just very different culture. You're rejecting a very Jewish man at this point and his perspective, and your wife, a Gentile woman, is the one who spoke logic and led you to that dinner table.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, they came and everything like that, but I felt like he was, see, that's the thing. So back in those days, this is now over 30 years ago, you kind of felt there was a sense of being a traitor to your faith. Once you became a Christian, let's say, you really were no longer Jewish. You had kind of transitioned over. So there was kind of that sense that, you were kind of a traitor to your people. So perhaps, I can't remember my exact feelings at that moment, but perhaps I was feeling like, well, here's a person who has left our faith, he's left Judaism, and he's become a part of something totally different. And this was not true at all. I mean, actually, he was very, very Jewish and very much involved with his faith. He had taken on that most important component, which I truly believe now, and that most important component for a Jewish person is to come to faith in Yeshua, come to faith in Jesus, because that really doesn't separate you from Judaism, but it completes you as a Jew. It makes you really understand the meaning behind all the scriptures, because there's like 300 prophecies in the Old Testament about the Messiah and coming to believe and coming to faith and all this. And if we as Jews reject Yeshua, then really we're rejecting God in a sense.
The more I learn, the more I believe that's true as well, Dave. So Rabbi Lauren is a very straight talker, right?
Yes.
And so you're sitting at the table with a man you didn't want in your house, and he's obviously Jewish. He looks Jewish. And so how was that a tense conversation?
Well, obviously, being part Japanese in a sense because of the years in Japan, we have a guest here. I'm not about to I was just waiting. I honestly think I was just waiting for him to thump the Bible on the table and
you were waiting for him to tell you you're going to hell?
I don't know. It's happened so many times in my life, even at church services when I would go with Jennifer, people would, after services, they'd be like, well, so where do you guys go to services or something? And I'd be like, well, I'm Jewish, I don't go to church. And then the next thing you know, there are like 3 or 4 people over there talking to you about, you really should come to belief and, all that, a lot of pushing it, a lot of pressure. It was like that. It wasn't really, in my feeling, like loving me into the word as much as
that's not a Japanese thing. That's not a Japanese thing, is it? Either.
No. That's not. Japanese are being a very forward and aggressive like that in Japan is considered to be an extreme social taboo.
It's an extreme social taboo. So
you do not. So you don't pressure people like that. You don't become aggressive, in terms of, pushing your views on people. So yeah, it's just not done in Japan.
It's not done. Yeah. So Rabbi Lauren, he never told you were going to hell, did he?
No, he didn't. He was very. That's why I was waiting. I was waiting for him to do it. Finally, Roger, I honestly couldn't take it anymore. I was just like, he's not saying anything. So I basically fired the only shot that I had in my arsenal, and it's kind of like it was. My dad had mentioned this to me. It's not like I really had read it. It's like my dad had mentioned to me. So here's the belief in Judaism, okay? So obviously you know the story of the binding of Isaac, right?
Akedah.
Right, yeah, the Akedah, right. So Abraham binds Isaac. He takes him to the certain spot that God tells him to, and then he's about to kill Isaac when God stays his hand and provides the substitute with the ram caught in the bush. Okay, so from that, there is a Jewish understanding that God will never require a human sacrifice. Therefore, Yeshua couldn't really be the Son of God because he really became a sacrifice. And so that's the contradiction. That's a Jewish thought of the Old Testament saying, why Yeshua should be rejected as the Messiah.
That's logical.
It is.
Yeah.
It's not true, but it's logical.
Yeah.
So I said, listen, here's why I don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And I didn't know anything about it. Really hadn't read the New Testament or anything about it. I just decided, I'm just going to throw this out there. And I threw it out there. And Rabbi looks at me and he kind of nods a little bit. And then he kind of says a few things about, there was child sacrifice going on. There's some other tie-ins, that you have to really examine. That's not necessarily true in terms of, relating to Yeshua. It's a different situation. And so we kind of go with that. And then we finish dessert. And he said, I just have one question for you. I'd just like you to do one thing for me. And I said, what is that? He said, I would like you to read a passage of scripture for me. So I said, well, first of all, I'm not reading anything out of your Bible. Bible.
No New Testament for me.
I really don't want to read anything out of the New Testament. So, I appreciate it if I didn't have to do that, which is probably very forward of me, but that's what I said.
Yep.
And he said, no, it's not out of the New Testament.
Nope.
It's out of the Old Testament. And I said, well, I'm not going to read your Old Testament because it might be different from my Old Testament. I have the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures. That's upstairs. Right. I have the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society. Tanakh,
I'll read that one and that one only, mister.
That's right. I will get that. I want to get that book and then I'll read it. He said, fine. Go ahead. Get it. It doesn't matter. And so I got it, and I said, well, what do you want me to read? And he said, why don't you turn to the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, and why don't you read that chapter for me? And so I couldn't find it, of course, because I didn't know where it was. But I looked it up, and then I read it, and he had one question for me. He just had one question. He said, what is being referenced here, do you think it's a country, or do you think it's an individual? And I said,
the sages.
I believe it sounds like an individual. And he said, why don't you find out who that individual is?
Oh, the stinger. And then you found him. How were you found, and how did he find you?
Well, I tell you what. So what I decided to do was, he said, he also said, come and visit our congregation if you want. So I started going to Congregation Shema Israel. I think we first attended in, it was probably the end of the year of 1992.
Can I ask a question?
And then here's this interesting thing, Roger. So I decided I was going to read the New Testament. So I read the New Testament. It took me probably just a few days or whatever, a week. I read the New Testament. And then I started going to the congregation. I kept reading, different things in the New Testament. And here's what happened. In 6 weeks or 6 months, I knew that the New Testament was true. I knew it was true. It had to be. It had to be true because, as I was looking also at the Old Testament, I realized that in the Bible, you know, the book of Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament, it says, it basically leaves you with a curse. It says, if you don't do these things, I will strike you with a curse. And I was wondering, why is that the end of the word to my people?
Yeah.
Why is that it? Is that the end? And then as I read the New Testament, I realized how much more there was. And the New Testament is such a Jewish book, really, when you get into it. I mean, it's so amazing that it's been given this designation that it's a totally different, written by Gentiles. I mean, the New Testament was written by Jewish men.
Every single scroll in that book was written by a Jewish man.
Exactly. And it's amazing as a Jew when you start to read it, but we Jews don't read. So I knew it was true, but I didn't know how to go from not believing to believing, because I was thinking, am I going to be a traitor to my Jewish people? What's going to happen to my Jewishness? You know, all these things kept swirling through my mind. So as a result, I ended up deferring the decision to become a believer in Jesus for another year. It took me that long to really reconcile everything within myself.
That's right. It is a journey, isn't it? It's a meditative journey where you become introspective. Would you say this is true? You become introspective and you find out who you are, and then that causes you to find the thing that's outside of you because it's more beautiful than you are. You realize how broken you are, and then you find the God who can make you whole. Is that fair?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I certainly was, self-assessing myself and thinking about so many deep things, and what does salvation really mean, and there's a whole bunch of things. I think I can't remember them all now that were swirling through my mind, but probably just to bring it to conclusion, to tell you when and how I came to faith, I'll just conclude that portion of the story, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so here I am. I read the New Testament. I know it's true. I don't know how to really approach it or really become a believer in terms of reconciling my own self and my Jewish people to Yeshua. I'm just really kind of confused in this state. I'm continuing to go to Congregation Shema Israel. I'm continuing to travel to Japan on my business. I'm doing all these other things. And so on one of these trips, I was in Japan, and my business had concluded in Tokyo. It's now 1994, in May of 1994. And my dad was back in Japan. In fact, he was back in Niigata teaching. And I concluded my business, and I went up to spend a couple of days with him before I flew home to the U.S. So in order to do that, I caught a bullet train, a Japanese bullet train called the Shinkansen from Tokyo, and I'm traveling north, more into the countryside, across to where my father lived. So I'm sitting in this Japanese train car, and there's Japanese all around me, and I have my briefcase with me, and in my briefcase is the book More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell.
Yeah, I know the book.
And that book basically asks you to examine whether Jesus is liar, lunatic, or Lord. So I had read that book before, and at the very end, there's my wife had given it to me. At the very end, there's a prayer that asks you to ask Jesus, ask Yeshua into your heart. And I looked at that prayer, but I hadn't prayed it. And here I am on this train heading to see my dad, and I pull the book out of the briefcase, and I look at it, and I look at that prayer, and probably put it back in the briefcase. And then I took that book out again, and I looked at that last page, and I decided that I was going to pray and ask Jesus into my life. And so I prayed that prayer, and I'm just sitting there on this train with all these Japanese around me. And after I prayed that prayer, I heard something. And it sounded like there were some schoolgirls in the train, and it sounded like they were humming something. It was a girl's voices, and they were humming something. And I strained my ear to listen, and I was able to catch the tune, and I remembered the words. And the words were, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, and now I see. And at that moment, there was a tremendous burst of light. I remember just a tremendous burst of light, so great I couldn't even look, and it just was shining so brightly in my face. And so I closed my eyes, and then the light went away, and the singing had stopped, and I opened my eyes, and there I was. I become a believer in Jesus.
Wow. Rabbi Paul had a very similar situation. Rabbi Saul. Yeah. So
Rabbi Paul is a great man who has just done so many amazing things for the faith. I am just a very simple man who had that experience, and I will never forget it. I mean, I've only really felt that God, had something for me, like contacted me once in my life, and that was that moment. But that's what happened, and that's the way I remembered it, and to this day, it's as real as it was back then.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that Dave Goldstein is so much more like Rabbi Saul or Paul than I think you realize. You really do make a large impact in the world, and I'm thankful to know you.
You're very sweet, Roger. Like I said, I've read the words of Paul. He's amazing. Like if you read the book of Romans, I've read Romans. Sometimes I just read Romans over and over again, and every time I'm like, this man is so absolutely amazing. The way he presents his arguments and the logic that he uses and the brilliance. But if I can have an impact on a few lives in mine, like my family, my kids, help a few people around me, I'm very happy. But thank you for those kind words.
So you've made a large impact. To close this out, let's go back to that table that night with Rabbi Lauren, because previous to that moment, not only were you not open, you were hostile. Mm-hmm. And so you had a woman, a helpmate who was made for you, that gave you the book that eventually, not in a church, but on a train, in the middle of the world, you prayed out and God showed you the light, and your eyes were open and your ears were open, and now you're speaking about him. What was it that night? Was it the logical nature or the straight talking nature of Rabbi Lauren, which, by the way, I absolutely adore? I just spoke to him the other day, and he is a wonderful man. I miss him. Was it the straight talking nature of that? What was it that night that drew you to begin reading the New Testament and even attending a synagogue full of traitors who have turned away from the Jewish truth? What was it?
You know what? It's a very good question. It's very hard to pinpoint one thing, but I think probably part of it was, okay, I'll start attending. I know my wife wants to attend, so I'll attend, and I'll find some flaw, some logical argument that's not correct, some inaccuracy, and I'll be able to bring that forward, and then, that'll be done with it, and we'll be finished with that, and we'll move on. Part of me was curious to say, well, is there really a God in terms of this? Is it really connected with Jesus? I mean, maybe there might be something there. Maybe there'll be something I can learn. So I don't know if I could really pinpoint it, but I'm very thankful that it happened. And you know what? Over the years, since that time, I have heard it said that it takes a person about 100 contacts to become a believer. First off, you have to really want to. You've got to kind of be going in that direction, want to know the truth. But you never know, like when you meet people and you're talking about the gospel, if you're person number 1, if you're person number 25, or you may be person number 100, when you are speaking with that individual and they somehow become convinced because so many things have been brought in front of them that, yes, I want to believe, and will this person help lead me to Yeshua? So when you think about it in terms of that, you never know where you are in terms of contacting me. So Rabbi Lauren happened to be in this chain of people through my life. Some people were the people who knocked on my door and, told me I was going to hell. Other people were at these church services who maybe wanted to talk to me about the gospel. There was Rabbi Lauren, a Jewish man, presenting, asking me to read Isaiah 53, which was really the first Jewish scripture that kind of I focused on, and then inviting me to his congregation. there have been other people along the way. But at the end of the day on that train to Niigata, it just felt like I had nowhere else to go, that this was the thing to do. And so I took that leap of faith. And that's what you do when you become a believer. You take a leap of faith and you say to yourself, what I'm doing right now is not working for me, and I don't know where this new thing is going to go, but I'm just going to trust in God to show me a way forward through this, and through that be more connected with Him, and through that have a better understanding of His Word and how it impacts my life and the lives of others.
Truth. So, moral of the story is, don't be afraid to talk about Jesus. Even if you get it wrong, it still makes a difference.
Yeah, it's not you, it's Him.
That's
you
right.
are just there to point the way, but He will draw people to Himself. And, I think Jennifer, my wife, I didn't know this until later, but she prayed for me for 10
all
years.
the time.
She had the power of the praying wife, and she prayed for me to become a believer, and we were unequally yoked, and that was not a good thing. And she said, I let my emotions get the better of me. I knew that we were going to be unequally yoked, but we got married. And this is not a thing to say to other people, oh, you know what, I'm just going to marry someone who's not a believer yet, and they're going to become a believer, and they're going to have this amazing story. Most of the time, it doesn't work out that way. So, you need to be really careful about, meeting people that have the same mind as you, the same faith as you, that can walk down that same road together with you.
Well, God knew you would.
No, I've been very blessed. I've been very, very blessed. I can say that now because, I became a believer in 1994, and here it is, 2025.
Yep.
So, it's been a minute.
Well, Dave, thank you for joining us at Modern Mind, Ancient Book. I have really enjoyed this conversation. This is part 1 of 2. We'll be back for a part 2. And I just thank you so much, Dave.
Well, thank you for having me, Roger. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. If you'd like to contact us, feel free. The email address is modernmindancientbook@gmail.com. Until next time.